The Scottish Highlands are often wrapped in a Victorian myth of tartan, ancient clans, and a romanticized, untouched wilderness. But by the middle of the 19th century, the physical reality for the people living along the western coast and the Hebrides was deeply precarious. The regional economy was fracturing. The cash income communities relied on from the coastal kelp industry and local cattle markets had largely collapsed. At the same time, commercial sheep farms were expanding, moving into the best agricultural land. Pushed to the margins, these tenant farmers, known as crofters, were left to cultivate tiny, rocky plots. To survive, they had to rely on a single high-yield crop, the potato. Grown in traditional coastal ridges called lazy beds, the potato was remarkably productive. It provided enough calories to sustain families on poor soil, but it also created a dangerous monoculture. It served as both the primary food source and the foundation of local survival. Long before a biological threat crossed the ocean, the Western Highlands had been engineered into a fragile socio-economic system, vulnerable to the slightest shock. That shock arrived in the late summer of 1846. The maritime climate of the western coast, characterized by cool, rainy nights followed by warm, cloudy days, created the perfect environment for a specialized contagion. This botanical plate details the microscopic structure of Phytophthora infestans, a virulent fungus that rapidly attacked the region's potato crops. The spores propagated through the moist highland air with devastating speed, resulting in an almost total crop failure across many districts, particularly in the Hebrides. By August and September, newspapers reported a pervasive stench of rotting potatoes blanketing the Crofting townships up and down the west coast. Families were left without cash reserves, and their entire winter food supply was gone. Starving populations were forced onto the freezing shorelines, scouring tidal pools for seaweed and shellfish to stay alive. The blight removed the primary food source for a people already pushed to the absolute edge of the map. The same fungal strain struck Ireland at the same time, causing a horrific tragedy of mass starvation. Yet the Scottish Highlands avoided a mortality crisis of that same scale. Two major factors mitigated the death toll in Scotland. The population directly at risk was smaller, numbering around 150,000, and Scotland possessed a booming industrial lowland economy right next door, offering temporary escape and casual wage labor to those who could make the journey south. Back home, a massive private relief effort mobilized. Spearheaded by the Free Church and wealthy lowland philanthropists, public charity raised over £200,000, the largest voluntary collection for relief in 19th century Scotland. The government also stepped in with vital logistics. Powerful Royal Navy steamships were deployed to break through severe winter gales, delivering necessary grain and supplies to the isolated Hebridean islands. But this intervention came with strict conditions. Driven by classical political economy, the government refused to distribute free food. To avoid disrupting private trade, they tethered local meal depot prices to the high market rates of distant hubs like Liverpool and Glasgow. Survival was logistically possible, but it was gatekept by an ideology that prioritized the rules of the free market over the immediate relief of hunger. By 1848, the initial charity funds were exhausted. The prolonged crisis fell under the control of government-aligned administrators, led by officials like Sir Charles Trevelyan. These men approached the famine through a punitive lens. They viewed the Highland population as racially inferior, framing them as indolent. To administrators like Trevelyan, the crisis was an opportunity to force Protestant work habits upon a population they believed was inherently lazy. To implement this moral reform, they deployed an administrative mechanism known as the destitution test. The conditions were exacting. Starving crofters were forced to perform 8 hours of manual labor, often building useless roads or piers, in exchange for 1 single pound of meal a day. Relief officers were instructed to be the hardest taskmasters possible. Even the elderly and semi-infirm were subjected to the rationing regime, while single able-bodied men were routinely struck off the relief lists completely. The relief effort became a punitive social experiment designed to break the Highlanders' traditional way of life through a system of controlled starvation. Unlike a grain shortage that might resolve in a season, the potato blight was relentless. The disease ravaged Highland crops for over a decade. To survive those years and afford the required relief meal, Crofters had to liquidate their essential capital, their cattle. This sell-off left the tenant population completely bankrupt. Financially strained landlords used this vulnerability against their tenants. They accelerated the clearances, evicting ruined crofters so their plots could be replaced by large-scale sheep farms. For generations, the Highland people had shown a deep-rooted reluctance to leave their ancestral lands. But the duration and intensity of the misery finally shattered that resolve. The demographic loss was immense. Lewis and Jura lost half their residents, as thousands departed for Canada and Australia. This diaspora was forced by relentless crop failure, crushing debt, and landlord coercion. The potato famine became a tool of social engineering, where an economic and administrative system prioritized profit and moral punishment over the survival of the Highland people.